Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Yeah.
And today, we're going to be tackling a question that's really like as old as philosophy itself.
hmm
What is consciousness? And can we really explain it as just a product of our physical brains?
It's a question that's plagued philosophers and scientists, for centuries.
And you know we love a good challenge here. So
Absolutely.
you've brought some excerpts from philosopher Michael Tye's book, Consciousness Revisited: Materialism Without Phenomenal Concepts.
Yeah, it's a mouthful.
Just the title alone is kind of like, whoa.
It's a dense one.
What are we getting into here?
Ty gets right to the heart of some, really fundamental issues in the field.
Okay, so for our listener who's diving in here with us, can you set the stage? Like, what's the central argument that Ty is making in this book?
Sure. So basically, Ty's pushing back against this idea that we need these special phenomenal concepts in order to make sense of what it feels like to have experiences.
Okay, hold on. Let's make sure everyone's on the same page here. When we're talking about consciousness, we're talking about that subjective feeling, the what it's like to see red or feel pain or taste chocolate.
Exactly. The raw feel of experience.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And so the idea of phenomenal concepts is something that comes from people who generally believe in materialism.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that consciousness arises from physical processes in the brain,
Right.
but they think that we need these extra concepts, these phenomenal concepts, to kind of bridge the gap between those physical processes and that subjective feeling.
So it's like saying, okay, the neurons are firing, but how do we actually get from that to the experience of red?
Yeah,
And phenomenal concepts are supposed to be the answer to that.
right. That's the traditional view.
Okay.
But Ty thinks this is adding unnecessary complexity to the picture.
Okay.
And he argues that we can actually understand our subjective experiences using the same conceptual framework that we use for everything else, like understanding the external world.
So no need for this special category of concepts just for consciousness.
That's his claim, yeah.
That's a pretty bold claim. How does he back that up?
So he uses a lot of interesting thought experiments and real-world examples.
Okay.
And one of the most striking ones is this thing called the distracted driver scenario.
Okay.
Have you ever had that experience where you're driving and you suddenly realize
Oh, yeah.
that you haven't been paying attention to the road for the past few miles?
All the time.
Yeah,
Especially like long stretches of highway.
exactly. Yeah.
You're just like, where am I? What's happening?
Yeah, you're on autopilot.
Yeah.
And so you were technically seeing everything.
Yeah.
Your eyes were open, the light's hitting your retina,
Right.
but you weren't consciously aware of it.
Right.
So Ty's question is, can you have the feeling of visual experience without actually being aware of what you're seeing?
So in that case, there's like this disconnect between phenomenal consciousness, that
Yeah.
raw feeling of seeing, and actually like being conscious of what you're seeing. It's like those two things can be separated.
That's exactly his point.
Mm-hmm.
And that challenges this idea that we need these distinct phenomenal concepts.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we don't need them to explain how we grasp the feeling of experience.
Wow. Okay. It really makes you realize how much we just take for granted about our own awareness, right?
Totally.
Okay. So what other examples does he use to kind of drive this point home?
So another one he uses is what's called the speckled hen example.
Okay.
So imagine you're looking at a hen
Mm-hmm.
that's covered in speckles.
Okay.
Could you accurately count all of those speckles just in one glance?
No way. There's too many.
Right.
Too many to keep track of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is supposed to challenge the idea that when we see something,
Right.
we're forming these perfectly detailed, complete mental representations of it.
Interesting.
So if we're not consciously aware of every individual speckle on that hen, does that mean we're not really seeing them?
It makes you wonder what seeing really means.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like he's questioning what it means to have cognitive access to our experiences. Is that term like important in understanding his arguments?
It's a key term, yeah.
Okay.
So when he talks about cognitive access, he's referring to our ability to consciously access and report on the contents of our experience.
So it's not just like passively receiving sensory information. It's about our minds actually being able to like process and engage with that information and make it available to us.
Exactly. It's about actively engaging with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's like Ty's examples are suggesting that maybe cognitive access plays a much bigger role in shaping our conscious experience than we realize.
That's right.
Okay, so far so good. We've got Ty questioning the need for these phenomenal concepts, and he's using some really interesting examples to do that. But where does materialism fit into all this? Is he saying that the whole idea of materialism is wrong?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Ty actually remains a strong advocate for materialism.
Okay.
He's not arguing against the idea that consciousness arises from physical processes in the brain.
Right.
He's more interested in kind of refining how materialists should explain those subjective qualitative experiences.
So it's like, okay, I agree that the brain is the basis of consciousness, but I think we need a different way to explain how those physical processes actually give rise to feelings and experiences.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
precisely it.
And that's where his critique of phenomenal concepts comes in.
Right.
He thinks we can explain those subjective feelings without having to, like, invent these special concepts.
That's the idea.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this could work, but it also raises some new questions.
Yeah.
Like, if we're not using phenomenal concepts, how do we explain the classic explanatory gap problem? That,
Right.
that age-old question of, like, how physical processes give rise to the feeling of subjective experience.
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
Right.
And it's one that Tye tries to address head-on.
Okay.
And so instead of relying on these phenomenal concepts, he
Yeah.
draws a distinction between two different types of knowledge.
Yeah.
He calls them thing knowledge and fact knowledge.
Thing knowledge and fact knowledge. Okay,
Yeah.
break those down for us.
Okay, so thing knowledge is knowing something directly by acquaintance.
Okay.
So think about knowing a person, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You can know a lot of facts about them.
Right.
You know, their birthday, their favorite color, where they went to school.
Right, all those external facts.
But you don't really know them
Right.
until you've interacted with them directly.
Okay.
So fact knowledge is knowing truths about a thing.
Okay.
But thing knowledge is knowing the thing itself through direct acquaintance.
So, like, knowing the facts about riding a bike is different from the actual experience of riding a bike.
Exactly.
Okay.
You can have all the theoretical knowledge in the world about how bicycles work,
Right.
but it's not the same as actually, feeling the wind in your hair, balancing your body, that direct experience of riding.
Right. Okay, I'm with you. That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
So how does this apply to consciousness then?
So Tye's argument is that we know phenomenal character, that what it's like aspect of experience
Right.
through that direct acquaintance.
Okay.
Just like we know a person by interacting with them, not just by reading their biography.
So our knowledge of experience isn't just about having a bunch of facts about what's happening in our brains.
Right.
It's about this direct, firsthand encounter with the feeling itself.
Exactly.
Okay, this is getting really interesting.
Yeah.
So he's saying that this thing, knowledge of phenomenal character, is possible.
Right.
Even without invoking these special phenomenal concepts.
That's right.
Okay, this is really challenging some assumptions I have about consciousness.
Yeah, it's a really interesting view.
I'm really curious to hear more about how Tye applies this framework to some of the other big philosophical puzzles about consciousness.
Sure.
But I think we're going to have to save that for our next segment.
Yeah, we've only just scratched the surface.
We got a lot more to cover.
Absolutely. All right, we'll be back.
Sounds good. We're back and ready to kind of delve a little deeper into Michael Tye's approach to consciousness.
Yeah.
Before the break, we were talking about how he rejects the need for those special, phenomenal concepts to explain subjective experience.
Right, and how he emphasizes the importance of what he calls cognitive access.
Right, our ability to actually access and report on those experiences.
Exactly.
So how does Tye apply this framework to some of the classic philosophical puzzles about consciousness?
Well, one of the ways he does this is by revisiting this thought experiment that's been giving materialists headaches for, decades now.
Mm-hmm.
Mary the neuroscientist.
Oh, yes.
The infamous Mary.
Everyone loves to talk about Mary.
Right, so she lives in this black and white world,
Mm-hmm.
but she knows all the physical facts about color vision.
Right.
And the thought experiment says that when she finally sees color for the first time,
Mm-hmm.
she learns something new.
Right, and that's supposed to be a problem for materialism because how could she learn something new if she already knows all the physical facts?
Exactly.
So how does Tye handle that if he thinks we don't need these phenomenal concepts?
That's the challenge for sure.
Right.
But Tye argues that Mary doesn't actually learn a new fact about color.
Okay.
Instead, what she gains is a new type of knowledge. Knowledge by acquaintance.
Ah, okay. Thing knowledge versus fact knowledge.
Exactly. You got it.
Yeah, okay. I'm starting to see where you're going with this.
Right. So remember that distinction we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
Mary already has all the factual knowledge about color vision, but now she's directly experiencing it,
Right.
which is a different kind of knowing altogether.
Right, like knowing all the facts about a person versus actually, like, meeting them.
Exactly. Perfect analogy.
Okay, so even though she knew all the scientific facts about color, experiencing red itself adds a new dimension to her understanding.
That's Tye's point.
It's not about learning new facts. It's about like a new way of knowing.
Exactly.
Okay, this is really making me rethink this whole idea of subjective experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we often assume that our feelings and sensations are completely private.
Right.
Like nobody else can access them.
Exactly, this inner world.
But Tye seems to be suggesting that there's a way to understand subjective experience in terms of more objective external properties.
That's right.
That's a pretty big shift in perspective.
It is. It has some pretty profound implications.
Like what? What kind of implications?
Well, for one thing, if phenomenal character is just this external property,
Mm-hmm.
then it kind of raises the question of whether we could be mistaken about our own feelings and sensations.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying that we could be wrong about what it feels like to experience something?
Well, Tye's view does kind of open up that possibility.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
If phenomenal character isn't this special private thing
All right.
that only we have access to,
Mm-hmm.
then it becomes, subject to the same kind of scrutiny and potential for error.
Like any other property.
Exactly.
That's a pretty radical idea, you know?
It is.
It challenges this very basic belief that we have that we can't be wrong about our own inner experience.
Right. It really shakes things up.
Okay, so what other, ramifications does this have?
Well, it also has some interesting implications for, this other big philosophical question,
Mm-hmm.
the problem of other minds.
Right. How can we ever really know what it's like to be another person?
Exactly.
If our own subjective experiences are not completely private,
Right.
then maybe there is a way to bridge that gap.
Maybe. That's one of the things that Tye's view allows us to explore.
This is all so fascinating.
It is.
But I'm also wondering how Tye reconciles this view with some of the other, strange phenomena that we know about consciousness.
What do you have in mind?
Like, what about cases where our conscious experience seems to be totally at odds with what's actually happening in the world?
You're talking about things like change blindness
Yeah, exactly.
or the refrigerator light illusion.
Yeah, those examples where we think we're seeing everything, but we're actually missing huge chunks of information. Right.
How does Tye account for that?
So let's start with change blindness.
Okay.
You know, those videos where something major changes in a scene,
Uh-huh.
but people just completely fail to notice it?
Right.
So Tye's argument is that in those cases, we're not actually seeing the things that change.
Okay.
Our attention isn't directed towards them.
Right.
We haven't, conceptually grasped them as distinct entities.
Right.
So they don't really enter our conscious awareness.
So even though the information is hitting our retinas, our brains are filtering it out.
That's the idea.
Interesting.
He thinks our cognitive processes play a much more active role
Mm-hmm.
in shaping what we see than we typically realize.
Okay.
And this is even more evident in the refrigerator light illusion.
Okay, remind me what that one's about.
Sure, so think about how often you actually open your refrigerator.
Quite a bit.
Right, multiple times a day.
Yeah.
But has you ever really stopped to think about whether the light inside actually turns off when you close the door? Never really thought about it.
Most people assume it's always on.
Yeah, I just assume it's always on.
Right. But we don't really have any continuous visual confirmation of that.
Yeah, that's true. It's like we just fill in the gaps.
Exactly.
We assume that the light is on even though we don't see it most of the time.
Right.
Okay.
And so Tye argues that this illusion,
Mm-hmm.
much like the change blindness example,
Yeah.
really highlights the limits of our conscious awareness
Okay.
and the crucial role that attention plays
Mm-hmm.
in shaping what we actually experience.
So we're not just passively observing reality.
Nope.
We're actively constructing it
That's right.
based on our expectations and our attention and all these other cognitive processes.
Exactly.
Man, this is really making me question how much I can trust my own perception of the world.
Yeah. A pretty humbling thought.
If our brains are constantly, filling in the gaps and
Right.
creating this illusion of completeness, how can we be sure that we're ever really seeing things as they actually are?
That's the big question, right?
It's a big one.
It gets to the heart of what Tye is trying to do.
Yeah.
He's really challenging us to rethink some of our most fundamental assumptions about, consciousness and perception.
And the nature of reality itself.
Exactly.
So it's not just about phenomenal concepts.
Right.
It's about reframing our entire understanding of how our minds interact with the world.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, so this reframing,
Yeah,
it has implications for, so many other questions.
it does.
Like the nature of knowledge,
Mhm.
free will.
Uh-huh. The mind-body problem.
It's like every time we answer one question,
Right.
10 more pop up.
That's how it goes.
Okay, before we wrap up this segment,
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear a bit more about Tye's views on another really key concept in philosophy of mind,
Hmm.
intentionality.
Ah, yes. Intentionality.
Yeah.
The aboutness of our thoughts.
Right, this ability that our minds have to represent things in the world.
It's essential to consciousness.
So how does Tye approach this? Does he think we need phenomenal concepts to explain intentionality?
That's a great question, and I think that deserves its own segment.
All right, let's take another quick pause.
Sounds good.
We'll come back and explore Tye's take on intentionality and its implications for understanding consciousness. All right, we're back.
Back again.
Ready to continue our exploration of Michael Tye's Consciousness Revisited.
It's a wild ride.
It is. It really is. You know, it's fascinating how he manages to, weave together all these seemingly disparate ideas
Yeah.
from distracted driving to the refrigerator light illusion
Right.
to build this whole argument about consciousness.
Yeah, he's very good at connecting the dots.
He is. He really is.
Yeah.
So before the break, we were starting to touch on the idea of intentionality.
Right. The aboutness of our thoughts.
Yeah, this ability of our minds to actually represent things in the world.
It's really a core feature of consciousness.
So how does Tye approach intentionality within his overall framework? Does he think we need those special phenomenal concepts to explain how our minds represent the world?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Because Tye actually argues that we can understand intentionality in terms of causal relations between our mental states and the objects they represent.
So it's not about having these mysterious internal representations that somehow mirror the world.
Right. He wants to get away from that.
It's more about how our brains are causally connected to the things that we're thinking about.
Exactly. He says our mental states have a kind of information-bearing content
Okay.
that's determined by those causal relations.
Okay, so give me an example.
Okay, so my belief that there's a coffee cup on my desk.
Okay.
That belief is about that coffee cup because it's causally connected to the actual cup through my perceptual experiences.
So it's my brain is wired up to respond to the presence of that coffee cup,
Yeah.
and that wiring is what gives my belief its content.
That's the idea.
Yeah. So it's grounded in that physical connection.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that causal connection is what grounds the intentionality of my belief. It explains how my thought can be about that specific coffee cup, even though there's not a little, picture of a coffee cup inside my head.
Right. It's not about having a perfect representation. It's about that connection.
Exactly.
That's a really, elegant way to explain intentionality.
It is. It's very elegant.
Yeah, it avoids, all the philosophical baggage that comes with trying to explain how our inner representations can accurately, mirror the external world.
Right. All that kind of mind-body stuff that can get really messy.
Exactly. And it fits nicely with Tye's overall materialist framework.
Right.
He's really showing how we can explain even the most seemingly mysterious aspects of consciousness, like intentionality in terms of natural physical processes.
Right. The brain doing its thing.
Okay, this has been such a mind-blowing deep dive.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have. From phenomenal concepts and cognitive access to the refrigerator light illusion and intentionality.
Tye takes us on quite the journey.
He does. He really does. So as we wrap things up here, what would you say are the key takeaways from Tye's work? What does he ultimately want us to understand about consciousness?
I think, if you had to boil it all down, Tye's main message is that we need to move beyond these traditional ways of thinking about consciousness as something separate from the physical world, beyond the brain or beyond the body.
So he's urging us to embrace a more grounded, naturalistic approach.
Exactly.
That really recognizes the deep connection between our minds and our brains.
Precisely.
So we don't need to invoke these mysterious, phenomenal concepts.
Nope.
Or posit a non-physical soul.
None of that.
To make sense of our subjective experiences.
Right.
It's really the brain is doing the work here.
That's the key.
Yeah, okay. This is a perspective that really opens up a whole new way of thinking about, ourselves and our place in the universe.
Absolutely. It changes everything.
It does. And while Tye's view might seem kind of simple on the surface, it has really profound implications for how we approach everything, from perception and knowledge to free will and, the meaning of life.
It's the whole package.
It really is. It's definitely left me with a lot to ponder. Like, if Tye is right and our subjective experiences are ultimately grounded in these causal connections to the world,
Yeah.
what does that mean for the idea of a self? Like, is there a core, unchanging me somewhere in my brain? Or is the self more like a fluid, dynamic process that's constantly being shaped by my
That's
experiences?
the question, isn't it?
That's the big one.
Ty would definitely want us to keep thinking about that.
Yeah, it seems like, every answer we uncover in this field just leads to even more fascinating questions.
That's the beauty of it.
It is. It really is. Well, a huge thank you to our expert for guiding us through this incredible deep dive into consciousness. And to our listeners, keep those minds curious, keep asking those big questions, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive